Ready to go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second day of the World Bank and Middle East Institute Roadmap for Climate Action event in Middle East and North Africa. Today, we're going to have a couple of sessions, our first of which is focusing on achieving economic growth through energy and transport decarbonization. I'll introduce the moderator for this session, who is Mr. Hussam Bediz, and he is the practice manager of energy and extractives for global practice at the World Bank. So with that, I'll just pass it to you, Hussam, and we can get underway.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, and good afternoon from Amman, and good morning to all of you, wherever you are connected from. Thanks, Mohammed, for the introduction. I'm Hussam Bediz, the practice manager of the energy program in the Middle East and North Africa. I'm based in Amman. I would like to welcome you to this third panel today as part of this event on climate change in MENA region, which as Mohammed said, started yesterday. This third panel is on energy transition and low carbon mobility in MENA region, which is one of the 4 transformational areas supported by the World Bank Group MENA Climate Action Plan. Under this area, the action plan supports MENA countries by promoting long-term emission reduction and economic diversification strategies, scaling up renewable energy and energy efficiency, and it's also support shift to low carbon and resilient transport systems. This panel discussion will focus today on pathways that the region can follow toward low carbon future with 2050 as a milestone. The panel will discuss a number of energy transition issues, including challenges and risks, but also the economic and job opportunities that could be created by such transition toward the low carbon economy. The panel will also discuss the potential for deploying renewable energy and new technologies at scale to enable MENA countries decarbonize their energy and transport system while achieving economic growth. In today's panel, we have 5 experts on energy transition, clean energy development, and low carbon mobility. 3 from the World Bank and 2 experts working in the region. But before I start, I'd like to remind you that this session is recorded and publicly viewed. And also I encourage you, if you have any questions or comments, to put them on the chat box, and we'll try to answer as much question as they come. So let me start here today. We have our first speaker is Monali Ranadi. Monali is a senior energy specialist in the Middle East and North Africa region at the World Bank. Since she joined the bank in 2007, Monali has worked on investment lending, policy dialogue, and technical assistance for development of the energy sectors in multiple number of countries, with a focus on innovative financial and institutional solutions and cross-sectorial engagement on climate change. Monali currently leads the energy programs in Jordan and Palestine. Monali will start the panel discussion by reviewing challenges of decarbonization in MENA region with a range of countries from high dependency on oil and gas exports to net importers. As Monali will show in her presentation, climate change is expected to impact demand for energy and will require a comprehensive approach toward a long-term low-carbon transition. So Monali, come in. You have around 6-7 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Hussam. So Mohammed, could you please put up my slides? Thank you very much. So we're going to talk, I'm going to speak a little bit about how do we keep pace with the global target of net zero carbon by 2050. In MENA region, we face a very interesting challenge because of the diversity of the countries and the relationship that these countries have with the energy sector, both for as economic drivers, but also as absolute essential need for maintaining a basic quality of life. Next slide, please. So just a very quick look at what has been happening when we look at the CO2 emissions and the gross national income trends globally. On the left-hand side, you see that the world seems to have started a process of decoupling much earlier than where MENA countries find themselves. And one should really not be surprised that we see this trend. But it also shows us the magnitude of the challenge and how far MENA needs to go to be able to actually talk about net zero emissions by 2050. Next slide, please. And why do we have that very strong coupling? I think it's important to understand the reasons before we are able to find solutions. First, of course, is that so much of the electricity generation mix, it's nearly 98%, is still coming from fossil fuels, and quite understandably so. We have major exporters, and we have net importers, and we have extensive fragility and conflict situations as well, which automatically leads to more dependence on fossil fuels for generation. We also have a very unique problem or opportunity, let's say, wherein the region has massive potential for solar, especially, but then also other renewables, whereas the actual share of renewables in total energy consumption is still at very low at 7%. Some of it, of course, is understandable if you see the figure that 52% of the global crude oil and 42% of the natural gas reserves are here, right? So in some ways, oil and gas is a domestic resource, the way we call renewable to be a domestic resource in the rest of the world. Two points I just wanted to also flag here. One is that 12 out of the 17 countries in the world which are water stressed or considered severely water stressed are in this region. So there is going to be an increased requirement for provision of water, which is a basic life necessity, also from using more energy, right? So it's not just energy for purposes of modern society, but of also basic fundamental need. And then one final point, which is that MENA region has the largest proportion of population living in urban areas. That has a direct impact on the way energy is consumed, the way people utilize energy in their everyday life, but then also with increasing temperatures, with the growing urban heat island effect, the need for that energy is actually also going to rise, but also not just for electricity, also for transport, right? Also for fuels around mobility. And one opportunity, which is a very important factor where energy consumption is likely to rise, is there is a massive amount of food lost and wasted in a country, in a region that is water scarce. In a region that has, fragility so much in many of the countries, this loss is not acceptable, should not be acceptable. And one way of reducing this is going to actually be to provide more energy, utilize more electricity to make sure that this food is not wasted and is available for consumption. Next slide, please. So looking at all of these magnitude of challenges, one thing which we see very clearly is that decarbonization in MENA is not going to be a question of only looking at generators or only looking at consumers or only looking at energy, electricity sector or transport. It is something that cuts across sectors. It will require a whole of economy approach. Next slide, please. And perhaps it actually needs to go not just whole of economy, but across sectors and across countries. So in terms of focusing on today's topic, which is more on energy and transport, there are several areas wherein the long-term emission reduction strategy needs to look at how energy as a service is supporting all of the other sectors: water, food, agriculture, transport, and others. Similarly, how do you deploy renewables and energy efficiency, not only at utility scale, but perhaps at innovative different solutions that are also from the demand side, shifting already perhaps towards concentrating solar heating type solutions, perhaps looking at other innovative smaller solutions. So it's not just about large scale renewable, but it's also large scale renewable at small scale deployment. And then finally, the need for low carbon and resilient transport systems, not only in terms of reducing the amount of fuel consumed in transport, but also reducing the amount of fuel needed in terms of efficiency for transport, and the amount of transport itself needed through better design, transit-oriented development, and other solutions, which I'm sure my colleagues will talk about in the following presentations. Next slide, please. Now, having said all of this, within country, of course, there are many solutions. But given what we looked at in terms of the uniqueness of MENA, there is a greater need for regional cooperation, because there are countries who are, as we said, major exporters, and then there are those who are net importers. But more importantly, there are also a lot of countries which have challenges in terms of economic growth or fragility. So there is a need for looking at adaptation, because to some extent rising temperatures is a shared problem. Some of the solutions for helping reduce the impact of some of these rising solutions, for example, reducing desertification, or taking action on increasing some of the greening, to hold back some of the expanding deserts. These are all shared solutions, and it needs to begin with more knowledge and data sharing among the countries, not just technologies, but also of actual actions and solutions. Then the next one is in terms of climate risk management and preparedness, which is another key area, both for adaptation, but also increasingly for mitigation. As more regional interconnections are constructed, more regional connectivity is enhanced, to try and see how working together one could reduce or mitigate some of the risks coming from climate change, whether it's in terms of temperatures, storms, flash floods, and so forth, all of which have a massive impact on infrastructure and the ability of infrastructure to deliver services to the people. And then to more innovative ideas, there is an opportunity for regional market for climate services. This is something which has been thought about but not really looked at. But all the three pillars I mentioned earlier can actually utilize such a solution. And of course, there has been a lot more effort, and I'm sure there'll be spoken more about in terms of cross-border projects, whether it is energy or it is transport, or actually it is also about movement of goods and people and expertise, which is essential for a lot of the solutions to come together and actually have a meaningful impact. So that's my last slide, and I will stop there. But happy to answer any quick questions from your side. Thank you.
Munari, thank you very much. Actually, I like your presentation. It's kind of gives the background on the issue of energy transition and climate change. Two issues, probably, I mean, we don't have any questions right now from the audience, but maybe two questions or issues we can discuss later on. First, the issue of the role of energy subsidy reform when energy transition is really important. It's mentioned in your slides, but you didn't talk it about. And the second one is in relation to regional connectivity. This is really very important for MENA to be able to scale renewable energy, and maybe Dr. Magid will talk about it. But also its connectivity between MENA region and neighboring regions. We see right now it's very important in terms of clean energy supply, whether it's electricity or hydrogen coming in the future. So maybe if you don't mind, we move to Ashok, because Ashok can link right now into the economic benefit of energy transition. And then later on, we can have discussion on these issues. So let me introduce my colleague Ashok. He's our next panelist. He's a senior energy specialist and team leader working on clean energy operations at the World Bank for the past 15 years. During his professional career, spanning more than 25 years, he has led and participated in energy efficiency and clean energy operations in over 40 countries. Ashok has a PhD degree in energy policy and environment from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, USA. Ashok actually already put his slides. He will talk about the economic opportunities that can be realized by energy transition through development of renewable energy and deployment of clean energy technologies. In particular, Ashok will present initial results from the World Bank regional study he's leading on estimation of job creations and employment anticipated by clean energy transition with a focus on Morocco, Egypt, and Jordan. So come in, Ashok, please.
Thank you very much, Hussam. First of all, let me see if you can hear me.
I can. Please
Okay,
go ahead,
great.
and I can see your slides also.
Okay, great. Thanks. No, I would again like to thank everyone, thank the organizers, thank you for inviting me to join this panel along with our colleagues and friends. I know Dr. Maged as well for a while, so that's really nice to see all of you. As you said, Hussam, it's such a broad topic, but I would like to focus on the two topics which you mentioned. One is the our regional work on clean energy and jobs, because that's one of the core benefits which drives the clean energy transition in many countries and particularly relevant for MENA. And then also specifically on the interface of electricity and transport sector, the emerging electric mobility interface, which is becoming more and more important as we move countries towards net zero objectives. So let me try to go to the first one. So the clean energy transition and jobs creation. As we all know, investments in energy efficient renewable energy is proven to produce 3 times more jobs than investment in fossil fuels. This is across the value chain, which cuts across building energy efficiency, municipal energy efficiency, rooftop solar. If you include all those value chains and compare them with generation of electricity using fossil fuels, there is clear evidence from many countries, including the developed world, as well as the developing countries, that the jobs produced are quite enormous. And these, we are talking about net jobs. So if 27 jobs are lost, you still have 75 jobs created, which means you are still getting positive jobs creation. So this is driving a lot of the emphasis by many governments towards clean energy, because it's beyond GHG emissions reduction, beyond air pollution benefits. It's a more of an economic benefit and a social benefit which countries are looking for. In the bank, as we did an exercise since 2020 on analyzing the impacts of what we call direct, indirect, and induced jobs. So these are jobs which are created by renewable energy, energy efficiency, electric mobility, green hydrogen, and other areas. We picked up 5 areas within renewable and energy efficiency and did the analysis for 3 countries. Yemen, only for renewables, but really more importantly, Egypt and Morocco for their plans which they have announced as per their vision 2030 or 2050 of clean energy transition. So these are the results. In Egypt, if Egypt follows the integrated sustainable energy strategy 2035, which aims for 42% renewable energy by 2035 and significant increase in energy efficiency, Egypt will create more than 2 million job years by 2050. So these are an equivalent of average of around 67,000 just direct and indirect jobs. This does not include induced jobs and other jobs which will be created in the economy. If you add the cost reduction and the technical innovation and localization of some of these industries in Egypt, for example, producing solar panels and efficient water heaters and efficient coolers within the country, then these jobs will be 3.8 million net jobs per year. So this is a massive benefit which we have found and which is consistent with what other researchers and other entities have done, including RECRE, and Dr. Maged will explain. Similarly, Morocco, I'm not going to go to the details, but very high numbers of how just following the Morocco objectives of clean energy transition and their targets, which they've already laid out, more jobs will be created. The challenge, of course, is how do you capture these jobs? What are the skills required? What are the reskilling needs? What kind of educational training is required? What kind of engineering curriculum needs to be changed? And all that is a part of our phase 2 work, which we are doing right now, will be over by the end of this fiscal year with the bank, which is by June of this year. So again, switching to the next topic. Hussam, if we have time for a couple of minutes, I'll go to the e-mobility topic now. So in e-mobility,
Go ahead, Ashok.
yeah, okay, thank you. I know it's a lot to say, so therefore I wanted to be aware of that. So electric mobility. Okay, unfortunately, MENA is not the leader in electric mobility. If you look at this graph of the sales of electric vehicles, both e-cars, what we call the Teslas and the Nissans and all that, and the electric buses, MENA and many other regions like Latin America and Africa, of course, is quite way behind compared to North America, Eastern Europe and Central Asia, even East Asia and Pacific, which is the leader in public buses. So when it comes to e-bus sales, China is really 90% of the world's total stock. Now I'm pointing this out because there's a difference between having a Tesla electric vehicle versus having a public bus which is electric. It's a huge amount of GHG emissions difference when you replace the latter. And that's the focus of our study. And so what we did is we're looking at the e-mobility ecosystem. It's not as simple as even energy efficiency ecosystem, which is complex enough, or even the renewable energy ecosystem, because here you're talking about electric vehicles, which belongs to the private sector on one hand, you're talking about the charging infrastructure, which actually belongs to more of the public sector on the other hand, and you need to try to develop both sectors, because just having electric vehicles don't solve the problem. You have to have green electricity. So unless you have electricity which is coming from green sources, you are not really capitalizing on the benefit of electric vehicles. So this complex ecosystem, we try to capture in one of our regional work, which covers 4 countries, Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, but also Saudi Arabia separately, where we looked at all these aspects of vehicle grid integration. How do you have the vehicles sell back power to the grid when they're not running? How do you bring in more renewable energy into EV charging? What are the business models? What are the tariff incentives required, et cetera, et cetera? And again, this I'm just presenting 2 slides on the Egypt numbers, looking at it. Look at the right-hand side. This is fascinating. Why? Because a passenger car versus a bus is a huge difference in terms of GHG emission reduction. So what we have been trying to do in our work is trying to see how governments can make the public transport more electrified, while the private transport is already happening and will happen, but we need to put in a lot more incentives, a lot more concessional funds, etc., climate finance to make this happen. Now, once this is done, what Egypt analysis shows is that the actual impact on peak loads is not going to be that significantly high. We found that by 2030, if they have penetration of 30% of electric vehicles, it's going to be 11% of the average peak load. Now, remember, Egypt has excess electricity today, 20,000 megawatts of excess electricity. Unfortunately, that's not from renewable energy. So the idea is, how do you bring in more renewable energy to add this capacity? And my very last slide, again, this is the specific analysis at the Cairo Transport Authority. On a localized level, what would be the grid impact? My last point, we need to think in an integrated manner. Vehicle, electric vehicle, battery systems, grid, they all need to come together. Renewable energy can be brought in correct timing of the day to charge these vehicles, and these therefore have to be planned together. This transport and electricity have to work together. And this is my very last slide. I call it the 5 Ds, the 5 megatrends: disruption, decarbonization, decentralization, democratization, and digitalization. The world is changing. Our energy sector is going to transform dramatically from what we have been learning in the last few decades. And the next few decades would make these systems much more integrated and digitized.
Thanks, Ashok.
It presents a lot of opportunities. Thank you very much. And again, I'm sorry I rushed through it, but happy to answer questions.
Ashok, thank you very much. And actually, the discussion in e-mobility is a good point that we can have Arturo to come and discuss about decarbonization in the transport sector. And so let me introduce Arturo Ardila Gomez. He's the 3rd speaker in this panel. He's a global lead for Urban Mobility Solution Group at the World Bank Transport Global Practice. He provides overall technical support to the transport and mobility teams in different regions in the bank, on issues such as transport sector decarbonization, which is the subject today he will talk about, the role of disruptive technologies, and project financing. Arturo has a PhD in urban transportation planning and a master's degree in city planning from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. So Arturo, please come in. Actually, I think you have a view on e-mobility, but you're going to present on the larger issues of transport sector decarbonization. So please come in and have around 7 minutes if you can.
Of course, I will try. Thank you very much. As Monali said, the energy is generated in MENA overwhelmingly from fossil fuels. As Ashok said, electric cars will not solve the problem, more so if they use already scarce resources, namely fossil fuels. So we need to think, as also echoing what Ashok said, an integrated approach. I'm building on a paper I co-authored with Bianca Alves and Joanna Muri, part of the Transport Decarbonization and Investment series that the Transport Practice is organizing. And it's on decarbonizing cities by improving public transport and managing land use and traffic. Let me dive into the presentation. So indeed, cities concentrate emissions. However, if we were all spread out in a very low density, like almost rural, emissions will be much higher. Cities are efficient, and MENA here has, with its high urbanization rate, an advantage, but emissions from urban transport are increasing and they're difficult to tame. We will see why, among others, because of the challenges. Walking, biking, public transport, low carbon modes worldwide, also in MENA. And climate weather considerations of the high temperatures also come to the fore. We need to think about those, and I will speak. But even an electric car is a car, takes a space, it's inefficient. 2 cars occupy the space of 1 bus that carries 40 people, and those 2 electric buses carry, if at all, 3 people on average. Not by car, in total, the 2, 1.5. Usually it's less than 1.5, the number of cars. So we need to emphasize those 3, walking, biking, and public transport, but land use must be efficient also. MENA cities, like most cities in the developing world in the planet, have the advantage that they already have large modal shares on sustainable modes, public transport, walking, and biking. In Cairo, which is my main client right now in the MENA region, Egypt in general, Cairo overwhelmingly moves by public transport. Not the most efficient, but by public transport. We need to preserve that modal share as part of the strategy to decarbonize transport. So emphasize walking, biking, and public transport because they are low carbon modes and the modal shares that exist already are high. But we have some challenges on land use, on the way public transport is organized. Let me emphasize women. Women in the MENA region have one of the lowest labor participations in the workforce. That is changing. There is an increasing trend, but unfortunately, women are prone to accidents, not because of the gender, but because of the conditions of the roads. Think of the image of a car parked illegally on the sidewalk and someone with a stroller or wants to walk to public transport. And women in overwhelmingly use more greener modes, even in developed country contexts where they have a choice of a car, women tend to choose greener modes. Also by need, women travel by public transport. So we need to make it safe for them because there is a problem, particularly with parking, but also with the way the streets are laid out. To the solutions, complete streets, multimodal streets, integrated corridor management. They're very similar, but the concept of a complete street is we need to start building from the outset and retrofit existing ones so that there are proper sidewalks, proper safety considerations, median when the road is too wide so that pedestrians can cross it. Trees, more and more the literature emphasizes the importance to retrofit so that we get trees for shade, for managing the high temperatures and provide a cover from the sun. And this is a way to organize also traffic flows so that buses can go in on efficient lanes and cars separately because they interfere with one another. Of course, this has a tremendous impact on gender because, as I said, women walk and use public transport more than men. It's not 50-50. Usually when there is a car in the household, it is for the male user first, even though that person travels to the office, let's say, whereas women do linked trips. They go drop off the children, they take care of an elderly person, they go to work, they go back to the supermarket, and so on and so forth. We need to be more aware of the needs of women when they travel. Public transport needs improvement. Here is a picture of a bus rapid transit image. Here is another one from my hometown of Bogota. Yes, public transport, but we need to improve it. There are many, the spectrum for improvement is big. Bus rapid transit or a metro are the last steps. Let us start improving it, even if we cannot afford a BRT or a metro. And we need to couple any improvement, the complete street that I was referring to, with dense, diverse, and well-designed. The three good Ds, contrary to the three bad ones. The three bad ones are distant, dispersed, and disconnected urban development. Very expensive to serve with urban transport. We want compact, connected, coordinated cities. That's another terminology, the three Cs. This will help achieve compact cities with more built space, not necessarily high rises. The wealthy can live in high rises. The bottom 40%, as we call it at the World Bank, lives in high density, but in low rises. The bottom line is we need to build affordable space also close to public transport where walking and biking are also feasible. And we need to talk about pricing. Cars are subsidized. Parking on a sidewalk illegally, not only illegally, but for free, is a subsidy to the car user. It's unacceptable because it hurts particularly women and people who want to walk and ride bicycles. Pricing. Parking policy, a citywide parking policy that incentivizes proper parking structures, and this incentivizes the use of private vehicles. We will not decarbonize with electric cars. With electric buses, yes. Public transport, walking and biking. Over. Thank you.
Arturo, thank you very much for your presentation. Actually, I like it very much. I mean, you presented more on efficient management and planning of the transport sector. One question, I mean, before we move to the other panelists, I mean, Ashok talked about e-mobility, electric car, electric vehicles, and we see in some of the countries in the region, there is focus also in, for example, in Egypt, in switching to CNG. And in other countries in the world, they are looking more at the hydrogen cars and fleets and railways. So what's your view on the technology? I mean, you have not talked about technologies and decarbonization of the transport sector.
So in public transport, the World Bank has a project in Egypt, for example, in Cairo with the Cairo Transport Authority, where we're trying to do the first pilot for introducing in the proper way, building on lessons from China and Latin America, of electric buses. The Cairo Transport Authority, continuing with that example, also is switching towards CNG because it offers advantages. And in Lima, Peru, a bus rapid transit financed by the World Bank was one of the first to use CNG buses in the world for the BRT context. That BRT in Lima moves a whopping 700,000 passengers per day, more than the Washington, D.C. metro, with 7 times the network of that little BRT in Lima. On hydrogen, I understand, and Ashok here is the expert, is more for trucks, or we're analyzing it for railroads, because it might be better to go for hydrogen locomotives than laying out an entire electrification, which has a lot of cables, has a lot of substations, has its costs and its carbon footprint. Hydrogen might be better for locomotives. Over.
Thank you very much, Arturo. Because we have another 25 minutes, I'd like to bring Scott Livermore right now to talk more on the issue of energy transition in oil and gas rich countries. Scott Livermore, who is the chief economist of the Oxford Economics Middle East and is based in Oxford, Dubai office. He's also managing director of consultancy in the Middle East and Asia. Scott leads major activities in the GCC and Asia, which have recently included capacity building, macroeconomic modeling, and policy impact assessment engagements for government institutions. Scott has a degree in philosophy, politics, and economics from Oxford University, and a master's degree in economics from University College London. Scott, we talked yesterday a little bit. I mean, maybe you focus your intervention on energy transition in oil and gas rich countries in MENA region. In particular, if you discuss how you see energy transition pathways for these countries toward a global goal for net zero by 2050, which is a main challenge for these countries, and with renewables increasingly displacing oil and gas supply. So if you can discuss a little bit, how do you see energy transition in oil and gas countries?
Sure, thanks for the introduction, and it's great to listen to some of the very interesting and detailed presentations given so far. What I'd like to do, as you say, is focus a little bit on the oil producers in the GCC region, but also bring this up to the macro context and looking at the whole economy. As we know, the region is extremely vulnerable to the effects of climate change, both in terms of precipitation increases temperature. We've done a lot of modeling at Oxford Economics, looking at the impacts of global warming, climate change, as well as the economic impact of transition. And what we've found is that the economic impact of global warming rises for countries that are already among the hottest in the world. And clearly the Middle East and the GCC fall into that camp. So for example, in the summer last year, Kuwait, Oman, UAE, Saudi Arabia, all at some point recorded temperatures over 50 degrees. Our estimation is that if the GCC economy could be nearly 20% smaller in 2050, then it would have been with the absence of climate change. So there's really quite a significant toll on the economies of climate change and the rise in temperature. And the Middle East and GCC clearly has a lot to lose from rising temperatures, and that is incentive in itself to pursue transition. However, as we know, the cost for the GCC, or in the cost for the world of the transition to clean energy, could be significant and mismatched on time. So, as is typical with these climate change policies, the time dimension of cost and benefits are not necessarily aligned, with the cost of decarbonisation happening quite often upfront, while the benefits accrue very much over the longer term. And as Mona Lee showed, and I won't repeat the numbers she was showing in her presentation, but the transition in the GCC could be particularly costly. Not only is the economy directly dependent on fossil fuels, and in the transition economy, demand for fossil fuels are going to dry up. The non-oil economy has been built on energy competitiveness, and so very energy and emissions intensive. And as Mona Lee showed, over the forecast, the growth within the Middle East is likely to be increasingly carbon intensive, and therefore the exposure to mitigation grows, and the risk of stranded assets and having assets that are not compatible with a transition world are significant, and these could face write-downs and devaluations. However, despite this, and all the challenges that make transition difficult, there is opportunity. The Middle East has a few natural advantages given its endowments, which can facilitate success in the economies undergoing clean transition. For example, the region has a lot of potential for solar and wind energy, which could be harnessed, particularly with improvements in battery technology. It also has geological and industrial endowments that are suitable for carbon capture, storage and use, and this can be put to good use. So already the UAE is planning to take advantage of the energy produced from blue and green hydrogen. It's unveiled at COP26 that the UAE is targeted 25% global market share of low carbon hydrogen by 2030 as it launched its hydrogen leadership roadmap. And in addition to natural endowments, governments in the region have ambitious plans to diversify economies, accelerate growth in the post-COVID era, which will include reducing the reliance on oil and gas. So many of the Middle East countries, particularly here in the GCC, have economic visions for the next 10, 20 years that sets a pathway for their economies. There are also specific energy-related strategies and water security, such as the UAE Energy Strategy 2050 or the UAE Water Security Strategy. And this is backed with significant funds. The UAE Energy Strategy, for example, the government has said within that it plans to invest 600 billion dirham, so roughly 160 billion US dollars by 2050 to meet the growing energy demand and ensure sustainable growth in the country's economy. What all these plans have in common is the goal of national economic transformation and diversification. The GCC as a whole are really seeking to reinvent their economies. This is clearly a strong opportunity to move away from carbon-intensive oil operations, energy-intensive manufacturing, and to accelerate the transition towards greener growth. As we know, the clean transition is expensive, and this could prove to be an important competitive advantage for the GCC countries. A figure that would be well known to many in the audience, if not most. The IEA estimates that the global capital investment needed in energy needs to rise from 2.5% of GDP we've seen in recent years to 4.5% of GDP by 2030 and remain there in order to achieve net zero by 2050. So just summing up, the cost of that transition is huge. The public sector will shoulder a lot of the cost, directly or indirectly, and those countries with stronger public finances are clearly much better placed to support the clean energy transition. And public finances in much of the GCC are very strong, and several countries have accumulated significant financial wealth, which can be devoted to this energy transition. For example, Saudi Arabia has very low levels of government debt, and the ability to finance investment is also enhanced by the Public Investment Fund, which is becoming more active in supporting domestic investment. And this can include green investment. And similar can be seen with Mubadala in the UAE and sovereign wealth funds across the region. The biggest enabler for the region is ambition of the leadership and having the accumulated oil revenues to invest in the energy transition. And the governments of the region are making increased commitments. Most of the GCC submitted updated nationally determined contributions, NDCs, last year. Some countries, such as UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain, have pledged to meet net zero by the middle of this century. Indeed, the UAE was one of the first of the GCC countries to submit updated NDCs, and they have recently announced a new target of 23.5% reduction of GHG emissions relatively to a BAU case by 2030. Similarly, Saudi Arabia pledged to remove 278 million tons of CO2 equivalent annually by 2030. So these NDCs really show the ambition of the region. Admittedly, we're lacking some of the detail to fully assess, but I'm sure there will come, and some important measures are necessary. So, for example, the UAE have not included NDCs yet into domestic legislation. Saudi Arabia has retained an escape clause in updating their NDCs to allow them to revise their targets should there be any change to oil and gas exports. So really, to better assess the likelihood of GCC plans achieving their climate change targets, we need more information on the details, more details on the financing, about how the economies will ultimately transition from oil and gas. And I'm pretty confident that will come. And the fact that COP27 and COP28 will be held in the region puts the region in a really good position to continue to think about climate issues, blend that with their development and diversification plans, and really creates increased pressure to ratchet up their climate ambitions, which I think will continue to emerge and be quite opportunistic and identify areas where that can really make a positive contribution to economic growth and a positive contribution to the economic diversification agenda within the region.
Scott, thank you very much. Actually, very, very good presentation. I think what we need at one time, and maybe we'll come back to the MEI, we need specific session on the experience right now and the technologies that have been introduced in GCC countries in terms of CCUS, blue hydrogen, and how they mix the potential with the green hydrogen and renewable energy. I mean, this session is only giving us a little bit about what's happening right now in GCC countries. And because we have only 15 minutes, I like to bring Dr. Magid here into the discussion because Dr. Magid, as you know, that the renewable energy will be a major part of the energy transition. And RCRE has done a lot of work on in supporting countries developing renewable energy strategies. So let me introduce first Dr. Magid and me to talk on this one. Last but not least, of course, we conclude with Dr. Megan Mahmoud, who is the Technical Director of the Regional Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency RCRE in Cairo. Dr. Mahmoud has wide experience in the fields of sustainable energy transition in Arab and African countries and had played a key role in helping Arab countries to formulate their renewable energy strategies and initiatives. Dr. Mahmoud will present on the role of renewable energy development in enabling energy transition in MENA region. In particular, he will be highlighting key development in the region covering market structure, policy framework, institutional capacities, and scaling up finance as foundations for accelerating renewable energy solution and energy transition. Dr. Magid, I want to give you around 8 minutes so we can have another 4 or 5 minutes to conclude this session. Please come in.
Thank you very much. Can you see the slide and hear me well?
I can hear you. We can see the slides also.
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks indeed for inviting me to this event, and it's quite informative. And in fact, the previous speakers enriched my own experience a lot, and it was really informative and diversified. Let me start by getting into the subject directly. That's what we have been discussing. In fact, as it's clear that renewable energy now is a mainstream in the region. What we can see from the figures that we have almost 50-50 distribution of the installed capacities. Half are wind and solar and half are hydro of the installed capacities of renewable energy, which amounts to around 6% of the entire capacity, I mean electricity capacity or electric power capacity in the region. And the investments over the past decade were around $18 billion US. So this highlights that now we have a commitment, a clear commitment from the region to embrace forward-thinking policies. And also we are seeing, as we'll see later, a lot of, I would say, indicators and actions being taken to support renewable. But let's see this graph first. In 2008, when we started collecting data as RCRE, when we started even, this is an inauguration year of the Regional Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. Most of the installed capacities were hydro, and only 4 countries with 500 megawatts had installed capacity. In 2020, you can see that between the 22 Arab countries have been already installed capacities, and the share of solar and wind are getting much higher compared to hydro. Another important remark that during the year of in 2020, when we suffered all from the COVID crisis or epidemic, in fact, the region has almost lost 50% of its expectations of the installed capacities. The year before the epidemic, we had around 3,000 megawatts installed, total installed in the region. And in the year of 2020, it was only 1,375. So you can see the impact of, although this is a positive growth, that it was not felt in other sectors. So it shows that the movement is started and it is ongoing, although or despite the challenges that we have faced. And what we were working on as RCRE is to create this regional momentum, regionally coordinated actions together with the League of Arab States and the other actors and to create tools that the countries can build on for planning. And the most important part that we are proud that we have developed is the Pan-Arab Sustainable Energy Strategy, highlighting targets for the entire region, and also templates how to design action plans, how to monitor the progress, and so on. And right now, when we see the structure of the market, we can see that there are main policies that are being adopted. The first, of course, is the typical EPC contracting, when you have the government issue a tender, and this is owned by the utility, because it's still, unfortunately, not like Europe, the region has still vertically integrated systems, mostly. Anyhow, you can see EPC contracting for more than 17 countries. But what's interesting, really interesting, now that we are seeing private investment tools, including competitive bidding and auctions, direct proposal submission, feed-in tariffs, net metering policies, and the most common private investment promotion policies are competitive bidding and auctioning, where around 16 countries have already announced on the installed projects under this scheme, including, for example, Algeria, Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, etc., 16 Arab countries. And then net metering for a small scale, where more than 10 Arab countries are adopting net metering policies, and self-consumption would bring the number to a higher number. Another important mechanism that is coming on China, I would say, to the region, is the direct proposal submission. And here the beauty of this, that we are seeing, for example, in Egypt, we are seeing that some of the already planned projects or even contracted as conventional has been decided to shift to renewable. So, for example, the coal project in Egypt has been agreed upon with the awarded company to make it wind and solar. So instead of establishing a coal power plant, it is now solar and wind power plants with the same, I would say, awarded company. And this happened for 3 or 4 projects in the region. We are seeing this. And also, we have seen success story in, for example, feed-in tariff in Egypt, where the largest, I would say one of the largest solar complexes in the world was installed in Benban, for example. So the the policy instruments are in fact somehow getting enough maturity in the region that helps us to move forward. And also there are many dedicated institutions that are focusing on sustainable energy, renewable energy, and energy efficiency, and this helps paving the way for future investment. And the most important part, where the investors are considering, and you don't need to read this, but just to think about it, the credibility of the energy of taker when it comes to selling electricity. And here we have listed who are the off-takers in the region and the utilities, and many of them are ready, and even listed in the green utilities worldwide. For example, DEWA, for example, EHC in Egypt, and so on. And among the cornerstones is the energy subsidy reform. And in the energy subsidy reform, we can see that 13 Arab countries in 2020 have already well-established subsidy reform programs. And this was only 6 countries in 2014. So all these are elements showcasing the transition in the region. And for the investments, we are seeing some of the most competitive prices worldwide. In Saudi Arabia, 1.1 cent for kilowatt hour of solar electricity. In Egypt, 2 to 3 cents for wind and solar project, and so on. And this is because not only of the quality of the resource, but also because of the right mix of partnerships between the country and the private sector. And we have seen this, an excellent example of this also in Morocco, in Mazen. And we are seeing also the countries urging oil and gas companies to invest in renewable energy. Although, as expert in renewable energy, I'm thinking of this more as greenwashing. But anyhow, this somehow gives us a room to move further into renewable energy projects. Also, we are seeing models like corporate sourcing of renewable captive markets. When we see companies, big companies in the region now installing rooftop systems supported by financing mechanisms, where, for example, EBRD, EIB, KEF, others are financing. And anyhow, the share of MENA in general in the climate finance is not that much compared to other regions. So there is a room to access finance better. And we see this is an area for active actions among all partners to develop the capacities to access climate finance. We have started this already as RCRE, but I think others should engage in that. The most promising thing that we have calculated the potential all over the Arab countries, and there are more than 190 gigawatts of installed capacities would be within the next 13 years, within 13 years from now. And these are based on the officially announced targets. These are not just indicators. And these targets mean that we would have around 300 to 400 billion. So you can imagine the size of investment in the region. And the targets are really ambitious. You can see the targets in Morocco, 52%, in Egypt, 42%. Even Djibouti, they have a target of 100% renewable. We can think how this would be achieved. The distance from what we are in now to these targets are high, but this is also an opportunity for all of us to work and support in achieving these targets. And the last few elements that I would like to draw your attention to is the power to X issue. And the region is moving fast, in fact, trying to catch up in this, because it has the two elements of you can rely also in blue hydrogen, for example, which is based on natural gas. So you are maintaining somehow your leadership in this as a transitional phase to green hydrogen. And we are seeing a lot of momentum in this regard in Emirates, in Saudi Arabia, and Morocco, in Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Oman, Mauritania even announced ambitious plans. And this allows us to integrate and in fact, to translate the concept of sector coupling into reality. And I will not elaborate on that more but what we see that there is a promising opportunity for the region to have a success story in green hydrogen and exporting it to the geographical proximity to the region. And I mean mostly Europe, of course, and also Asian countries. Among different options of green hydrogen, we see that green ammonia will be the short-hanging or low-hanging fruit, I would say low-hanging fruit, and then others would come in. And by the way, today, Egypt signed an MOU for $5 billion with Scatic in green hydrogen. Finally, this was my last slide, and thank you very much. I'm sorry for taking long.
Thank you very much, Dr. Magid. I think you presented very nicely about the potential and the issues of scaling up renewable energy. And as you can see, most of the countries in MENA region, they have really very ambitious targets, but their progress toward this target is really very slow. And you mentioned some issues and policies, but there are also issues related to subsidy reform. There are issues that the World Bank has done a lot of work in it, in terms of regional integration and connectivity. And the last comment I have is on hydrogen. I mean, we're seeing a lot of rush in the countries in the region and signing MOUs in hydrogen and so forth, but we have not seen it in countries putting policies in terms of development of hydrogen. And the issue of regional connectivity is very important. And also the dynamics between the blue hydrogen and the green hydrogen, where we'll probably see more of blue hydrogen coming right now from GCC countries that will build demand and build export markets. That's something very interesting. We are allowed to extend for another 4 or 5 minutes. And I think we don't have questions. We only have one question about probably, I don't know if Munari mentioned this, that she said that the question is, you mentioned that fragility of a nation will lead to heightened dependency on oil and fossil fuels. I'm not sure if Munari said that, but what we are seeing in countries like in Yemen right now, with the highest fragility and conflict, there is a high reliance on solar projects. The World Bank and another development partners are supporting really solar development on the household and on the distribution level. So it's not necessarily that high fragility will cause dependency on oil. And we have 5 minutes. I'd like to come back to Scott, and maybe each one of you, if you want to have one minute to say what are the main challenge and where do you see the opportunities that countries need to go forward with. So Scott, you may come please.
Yeah, I think it's easy to look at the MENA region and look at GCC in particular and say it's going to be tough to transition and whether they've got the commitment to see through the transition. But I am relatively optimistic. I think, as I highlighted in my overview, there's probably no region in the world that's planning such dynamic change. And fair enough, that starts off economically, but there's increasing signs that that can be skewed and focused on the clean energy transition as well. And I think the fundamental thing to think about here is the resources available. So if those resources can be aligned with a consistent vision, then I think there's good reasons to be optimistic. And you've seen it already, whether it's ADNOC or Aramco focusing on new sources of energy. And I think that will be broaden out as they look to move into the post-COVID era.
Arturo, you want to have any last comment on transport decarbonization?
Well, to address the question that on micromobility, it does play a role. We like to say, and I sent literature via the chat, but we like to say that for low carbon solutions to be a real solution, we have to think door to door for all types of users. I mentioned women, and clearly micromobility plays a role for all genders, for all ages, hopefully with safety considerations, because some of these electric scooters can go fast, can go on a sidewalk, and the difference in speed between a scooter and a pedestrian, the differential in speeds is dangerous. But with proper regulation, as in the references I sent, they can be integrated to public transport, and in particular, so that the last mile connectivity is where this micromobility, like the scooters, the bicycles, play a role. Over.
Thank you. Ashok, 30 seconds, my friend.
No, thank you. I guess I agree with all of what has been said, because we're all saying the same thing, but challenge. I think moving from targets to implementation requires right institutional framework and governance, right policy enforcement, not just putting out a policy, but enforcing it, technical capacity, awareness, behavioral change, and finally finance. Unless all those pillars come together, these targets will remain targets, as we have seen in many of the MENA countries. We are in our country climate development report, CCDRs, in the bank, which is trying to look into this, but this is a challenge.
Thanks,
One
Ashok.
final thought, co-benefits. Let's not push all these just because of GHG emissions reduction, which is a great public benefit. Private co-benefits, jobs, air pollution, etc. Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Megan, any last word from your side?
I fully concur what all of you have said, and especially Ashok at the end. In fact, we have to create, for me, a clear pipeline of projects for the coming 5 years that translate how much of these targets of the net zero by 2050 and the net zero by 2060 and the target of 42% within 2024 and 52%, how much of this would be realized within the next 5 years, and how much. So clear pipeline of projects with clear tendering process, with clear policies, so that the investors can build and plan for that. And then, in fact, let me conclude with that. If we fail to plan, we plan to fail. So we need to plan for the short term right now.
Indeed. Dr. Magid, Scott, Arturo, Ashok, thank you very much. And Munali has to disconnect. I think you gave us really a little of what we need to discuss a little bit more. I mean, each subject you presented on could be by itself a session, 1 hour session. So thank you very much. And thanks for all the participants today. Muhammad, you take it from here. You close the session, please.
Thank you so much, Hussam, and thank you for the panelists. And I think, as you stated, this is just meant to whet the appetite. There's much more to come and discuss. With that, we will conclude our first panel of the day, which is our third overall for the 2 days. At the half-hour mark, which is about 25 minutes from now, we will start our final session. Hopefully, all of you attending can join us there. Thank you.